Hey guys, we are back updating the Power Rankings for Survivor 44 following episode 9, and this episode was fine. Certainly not as strong as the last episode, but still had some good moments, and it was also helped by the fact that there were no dumb twists that got in the way, which, unfortunate as it is that I had to say that, is something at least. But there are 9 players to talk about, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 9, we have the boot from this week, but here we have Kane, who obviously came off a really terrible episode that knocked him further down from where he was even 2 weeks ago, and obviously now he's out of the game. And I think there are a few key red flags that predicted his boot here. I mean, for one, like he does talk about the fact that he hasn't voted correctly this season, which I felt like was going to culminate with him once again not voting correctly. You also have the fact that Danny made a point to not target the people that sat out of the challenge, and Kane seemed to be pretty central in that, which I felt like was setting up Danny to break that promise and for us to further dunk on Danny, but obviously at Kane's expense. But I think the biggest one was when Jam Jam said that everyone that has voted for him previously has been voted out of the game, and obviously Kane is part of that. So it just set it up so that Jam Jam was going to get his way here. And yes, there were a couple of other things too, like Kane did get that whole montage of him talking about Dungeons and Dragons, which felt pretty reminiscent of what happened a couple episodes ago during the whole like twist that they were searching for, even though he doesn't find it. Obviously, in this case, it was for an idol. But obviously, all this leads up to him getting voted out here, which makes sense given that the Tikas wanted to weaken the Ratus further before potentially flipping to vote out some of the Sokas. And if we are looking at Kane's game, I don't think it's the worst in the world. I do think that early on he might have been in a little bit of trouble, but I think similar to Matthew, he found himself in a majority group later on where they were able to eventually pull in Jamie to where had they gone back to tribal, they probably would have voted out Lauren to flush her extra vote. And obviously when Carson joins, he builds a very strong bond with Carson as well. Builds a good enough bond with Matthew to where Matthew would have been willing to give Kane his idol had he been given the chance, but obviously that didn't happen. And then at the merge, like he does vote incorrectly during the Josh vote, and obviously he doesn't vote correctly thereafter, where obviously his side gets flipped on after the split tribal, and he was pretty much a goner at that point. So I think it's a case where he had a good enough pre-merge, but then a post-merge where he wasn't really in the numbers, but I don't think he's the worst player in the world. He definitely had some upside and was definitely one of the better case scenarios for what I expected from him this season, especially considering I was comparing him to Daniel Strunk of all people. But at the end of the day, he doesn't win, and because of that, he is here at number 9. And with that, there are 8 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely I think they are to win based on their edit and current game position, and really these bottom 2 have not changed. But at number 8, we do have Jamie Lynn, who did get more content in this episode, where she talks again about the fact that she still has her idol, which I felt like was pretty clear foreshadowing that she was gonna lose it by the end of the episode. Mind you, I didn't think it was going to happen quite this way. I thought it was more so that she was going to try to play it, only for us to finally learn that it's fake. What a shocker. But obviously instead we see her hand it off to Kane due to the fear of a knowledge is power play, which causes him to hand it off to Kane, only for Kane to get voted out with it in his pocket, and now she doesn't have it anymore. Now apparently based on exit interviews, it does seem like a lot of people believe that the idol was in fact real, which you do have to give Matthew a lot of credit for, the fact that he was able to make a convincing fake idol. But this also ties into why Jamie's unlikely to win, where she was so confident for so much of the season that it was real, even though we knew for sure that it was fake from early on. And in general, I find Jamie to be pretty overconfident in her edit. She called herself the MVP at the merge, and I feel like ever since, like, it's just been dunking on her over and over again, to where I don't really see her winning from this point. So because of that, she is here number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and we have another player that I'm pretty sure is not winning, but here we have Lauren. And Lauren, again, is not winning. I feel like she got pretty bad content where she says, oh, they should have split the vote last trial, but no one listened to her, even though we didn't really hear much from her. She says that the moral of the story is to split the vote, where they do agree to split the vote at this tribal, only for it to blow up in their faces again, where they lose one of their own in Kane. And I feel like in general, Lauren has not really been propped up much during the game, and I feel like this was more of the same for her. And I still feel like it's pretty bad. Now, you could say that she does technically make sound strategic arguments, but I feel like those are things being used to like support why her tribe loses out in the numbers here. So I feel like for all those reasons, I can't really support her at this point. So because of that, she is here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and we have someone who I'm pretty confident is being set up for a downfall within the next few episodes. But here we have Danny. And this episode was largely undermining Danny. He really comes off as more of a villain here. And I feel like it's being set up to where whenever the Tikas decide to flip to work with the Ratus to continue working the middle, they're just going to take out Danny first as the biggest threat. Now, he does get plenty of bad content here where he talks about, again, the plan to weaken the Ratus in the future. He says the game isn't won by playing a comfortable game, and obviously he's not comfortable after playing his idol, only for him to not even finding the idol. And he even says along the way that he doesn't care if he isn't subtle, which I don't think is that great. Later on, like he is shown like talking badly against the people that sat out of the challenge in exchange for rice. He says that it's embarrassing. He proposes people play the game by competing in the challenge. But I think the biggest thing of all is when Franny approaches him during the scramble, saying that they should probably be looking out to target one of the Tikas soon, given that the Tikas are clearly playing the middle. However, even then, Danny shoots it down. He says that Franny is going against the family by daring to want to go after the Tikas here, which obviously results in Kane being voted out. But I also feel like it only preserves the Tika's position in the future to where the Tikas could easily flip. And I feel like all of this is set up to Danny eventually being taken out himself, where he's going to think that the Tikas are going to ride out with the Sokas all the way down, and then from that point on, they'll assumably have the numbers to take them out, maybe through an idol play from Heidi, only for the Tikas to flip before the Ratus are begonged and take out one of their own. And I think Danny's clearly being set up to be a victim of that. So at this point, I don't really see Danny winning the game, and it's for that reason that I have him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I did juggle these two a little bit, but at the end of the day, I don't think either of them are winning at this point. But at number 5, I did decide to go with Heidi, who finds an idol here. Now, admittedly, aside from that, there isn't too much to say about Heidi. She does consider, like, playing the idol. She does talk about it being a double-edged sword. She's glad the Tikas are working with them. And she obviously says that she's not going to play it, only for her to not play it. So, I don't think there's too much negative about her edit here. It's just that I feel like at this point, she's probably not going to win. And I feel like she could be a victim of the flip that's going to happen. And while she could try to play her idol, I feel like it's not really setting up a Heidi win, which is why I do have her here on number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and it is the same top 4 as last week, and we still have the same person at number 4, but here we have Franny, who again, I don't think is winning at this point. Now, she does get a bit more content here where she recognizes that the Tikas are playing the middle. She even tries to get Danny to flip against them sooner, or at least keep an eye out for them, only for Danny to shoot that down. And I don't think that's so much a negative for Franny. I think that's more so Danny coming off as overconfident and setting up the Tikas flipping against the Sokas at some point. However, I also think Franny herself is probably not winning. I am very confident that Atika is going to win at this point. I said this now for the last couple of weeks. And I feel like this content of Franny recognizing that Tikas are this big threat is less so her being propped up as an underdog. I feel like it's more so her being set up as an obstacle for the Tikas to have to overcome in order to get to the end together. And I think that's just going to lead to Franny being taken out like around like final 6, final 5. I don't think it's going to lead to Franny getting her way in taking out the Tikas, as I feel like the story at this point is so in favor of the Tikas winning out at the end. So I think for all those reasons, I can't really have Franny as a winner contender at this point, but I feel like with her development as this opposition to the Tikas, I think she's more likely to be a major character in the future than these other people, which is why she is here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and it is the Tika 3, and it's just a matter of ordering them. But at number 3, I did decide to go with Carson. And I feel like this is more so because I feel like this was technically a better episode for Carolyn than for Carson, although Carolyn still has her issues. But I feel like I'm sort of back to where I was before on Carson, where I feel like he is someone that's eventually going to be taken out for being a big threat. Now, he does get a bit of content here talking about how he still doesn't feel well, considering he got sick last episode, and that he really wants people to set out the challenge to get rice because he just has nothing in the tank. And obviously that happens, and then later on he gets some strategic content about the Tika sticking together, and all of that pans out in the end. But I think another thing to highlight is the fact that Carson loses Kane here, who was one of his established relationships from early on this season. Like the fact that Kane just goes here without really much fanfare or really much input from Carson himself is another knock to consider. And I feel like at the end of the day, I'm sort of back to where I was before on Carson, where he just seems like this big character, this big player that's eventually going to be taken out towards the end of the game. So I think because of that, also because Carolyn went up, I did decide to leave him here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and as I mentioned a moment ago, we do have Carolyn. And I think this was a good episode for her, where she gets a decent segment talking about how she's opening up to people, she talks about her addiction, she gets her intro package, finally gets that personal content. She also gets to talk a bit about her strategy and how she has been wanting people to not suspect much out of her, that she wants people to underestimate her, that they want her to think that she's just there to have fun when she is playing the game and that she is strategizing. And I think for the most part, that's pretty good. And I'm glad that we got that segment to articulate Carolyn's game. And really, that was enough to have her above Carson for me. However, with that said, I still have some reservations. I think for one, she doesn't actually explain why she didn't vote with the other Tikas during the Brandon tribal. And yes, while this could all just be under the guise of her like throwing her votes elsewhere just so that people don't take her seriously, I think we could have gotten a bit more detail about that. And I also think later on in the episode, we hear her talk about how she wants Danny gone so bad, only for her to not vote out Danny and for her to not get her way there, which I think is also a bit of a knock, the fact that she is directly contradicted by what she said in confessional. I think that's also a pretty big knock. But I still think the positivity we got before then, as well as her articulation of her strategy, was at least enough to have her above Carson for me. But still, she is clearly the number 2 here, so because of that, she is here number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor 44 right now is still Jam Jam. And I think at this point, Jam Jam is a pretty clear frontrunner. Now mind you, I did have him at number 1 the last couple weeks, but I think this episode is just more of why he is the frontrunner. Where first up, he does get that content around camp where he gets to play I Spy, sort of like seeing his social game in action. But the main focus for him in this episode is him talking about how everyone that's voted for him so far has all been voted out at this point. And Kane is sort of another person that previously voted for him. And obviously he gets his way there where they want to vote out Kane. He gets his way there. And that storyline is further articulated upon. I think at this point it's pretty clear that Jam Jam is pretty much the main character of this season. And he has a pretty clear storyline to get towards a win. I think he still has like that element of him having an edit that hasn't been as undermined despite some negativity in the pre-merge, but also to a degree to where he's less likely to be targeted over Carson. Now it's possible that within the game that he could be seen as this big threat, like we did hear talk about Franny wanting to split the vote between Carolyn and Jam Jam with Jam Jam as a target, but the fact that Danny just shoots that down means that Jam Jam is probably doing something right there. And I think with the edit being so clearly in his favor, I think he is the frontrunner. I don't see how anyone else can be the frontrunner at this point. So I think it's for all those reasons that I'm pretty confident in Jam Jam to win the game from this point. And because of that, he is here number 1. And there we go. That will do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe. Really helps with the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the Power Rankings again, so stay tuned for that. I'm currently covering Big Brother Canada 11 and doing weekly Power Rankings of that, so stay tuned for that. And if you haven't already, be sure to join my Discord server, which you can join by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way. But for now, that's the video. See ya.